It wasn't that long ago that I had no interest in horror games, and that all changed when I played Haunting Ground last year. Since then, I've played a few more horror games and even made a video about a few of them, and many of you were kind enough to give me some suggestions on horror games to try out next. And while I haven't played them all, I have tried a few of them. One game that I didn't see talked about much was Siren, and I had shown it at the end of my horror video that it was a game that I wanted to try out. I really didn't know much about Siren. I knew more about Haunting Ground than I did about Siren, so I went into Siren completely blind. In this video, I'm going to go through the complete story of the game, so if you haven't played it, be prepared for spoilers. Siren was released November 6, 2003 in Japan, March 12, 2004 in Europe, and April 20th, 2004 in North America. Siren was developed by Project Siren, which was a smaller team inside of Sony's first-party studio, Japan Studio. Project Siren would have some notable figures come aboard that worked on the original Silent Hill game. Kajiro Toyama, who directed and co-wrote for the original Silent Hill game, would come, and he would be the co-writer and director of the new Siren game. The other writer of Siren would be Naoko Sato, who also worked on Silent Hill as a monster designer. The last member that worked on Silent Hill that would come and join Project Siren would be Iaso Takahashi, who worked on the art direction of the original Silent Hill game. The story of Siren takes place in a rural village of Japan known as Hanuda Village. The village is surrounded by 3 mountains. Most of the villagers there have lived there for generations and aren't big fans of outsiders. The story of the game is told through 10 playable protagonists over the span of 3 days. The first playable character we meet at the beginning of the game is Kyoya Suda, who has an interest in horror and urban legends. He visits Hanuda Village to learn more about the urban legends surrounding the village. Tamon Takauchi is a university professor born in Hanuda Village but leaving at the age of 7 after losing both his parents after an earthquake. Kei Makino is a priest belonging to the Mono religion, born in Hanuda Village. He also has a twin brother who is playable in the game, and that being Shiro Miyata. He's a doctor in Hanuda Village, and the 2 brothers were separated at birth and raised by 2 different families. Akira Shimura, the oldest of all the playable characters, but a skilled hunter, and he carries a rifle as a weapon in game. I'll dive more into all the characters' background later in the video because of spoilers. Risa Onda, who was born in Hanuda Village but left for a life in Tokyo. She's now returning to Hanuda looking for her twin sister, Mina Onda. Tomoko Maeda is a young girl who was born in Hanuda Village that ran away from home after finding out her parents read her diary. And if you think that's stupid, don't worry, it gets worse for her later. Naoko Mihama, born in Tokyo and wanting to be an actress. She's pretty quick-witted and has a bit of a temper, but her fame would slow down after a while, and now she's working as a reporter for a TV show called Occult Japan. Because of this TV series, she splits up with her team and ends up alone in Hanuda. Reiko Takato is a teacher at Hanuda Elementary School, and her student, which was the last playable character in the game, is Harume Yomoda, who lost both her parents in a car accident. Some other important characters that aren't playable are Yuriko Ano, and she's a college student that comes with her professor Tamon to Hanuda Village to help him with his research. Miyako is another major NPC that was born in Hanuda Village and has a special ability that I'll discuss more later. Finally is Hisako Yao, a nun belonging to the Mono religion of Hanuda Village. Now again, I'm going to go through the entire story of the game, but I am going to mark it off as spoilers and it'll be at the end of this video. So in case you are interested in playing it, you'll get to know about the mechanics of the game before you get to the spoilers. The first thing you might notice about Siren is the characters actually have the faces of their actors superimposed onto their models. This was done using 8 different camera angles. Depending on the person, you might like this or hate it. I thought it was pretty cool, and it's something I've definitely never seen in any other horror game. It felt uncanny to me to seeing these scans of human faces on character models. Even the enemies of the game have superimposed faces. The next thing you might notice is the voice acting of the game, and I think it's pretty terrible.
Blood.
Sir, we need to find the villagers. They must be panicking.
Please shut up.
But I did get used to it, and I hope you will too, because you'll be hearing them talk a lot, and they don't get better as the game goes on. It's kind of a surprise on how bad the voice acting is in this game, because this game came out in 2004, and there's a ton of games out there that came out with much better voice acting, especially for being a first-party Sony game. If for some reason you can't get past the voice acting of Siren, I have bad news for you. There is no option for different languages in this game. If you have the NTSC version of the game, it'll be in English. If you have the PAL version of the game, it'll be in the language of the country it was released for. There is no options for a Japanese dub with subtitles or any subtitles for any language. I do encourage you to try to get past the voice acting if it really bothers you that much, because Siren is a creative game that should be played. Visually, Siren looks pretty good. It looks fine for its era and all the character models look good. There really wasn't much to talk about there. I never noticed any rough animations on any of the characters, whether it was in a cutscene or in-game, but Siren does have like a grain filter throughout the game, and that might be annoying to some people, but I felt like it added a classic horror movie aesthetic to it. The game takes place in 2003, and VHS was still popular during that time, so maybe that's what the developers were going with. Kinda like a lost VHS kind of thing. That and the superimposed faces on the characters gives Siren a very uncanny feeling to it, and I really like that. The grain can't be turned off, by the way, but it's never really a big deal for me anyways. If I can make it past the voice acting of this game, the VHS grain is nothing to me. When starting the game, you'll be introduced to Kyoya staring at his broken bike. After that, he walks through the foggy woods to discover a girl with her dog smashing something with a rock. She notices Kyoya and runs away. Night comes around later and Kyoya stumbles upon a ceremony taking place at the same location. The ceremony is short-lived though because Kyoya is spotted and he takes off running into the woods. Kyoya then gets confronted by a police officer pointing a revolver at him. And this is where the gameplay really starts. Kyoya runs from the cop only to fall off a ledge. This is where you get your first level. You're given a mission objective for every level you play. But for this mission, the objective is simple. Escape the police officer. And just like that, you're thrown into gameplay. Thankfully, the game starts you off in a small level, giving you time to run and hide and figure out the mechanics. It gives you plenty of time to get your bearings. Kyoya has no weapons at the start, so clearly I'm not meant to fight the police officer. When you start the level, there's a white truck right in the middle of the stage. Checking it informs you that the truck is locked, so you're gonna need a key to unlock it. There just happens to be a small office building nearby, and when you go in it, you'll find the key, and the game teaches you how to pick it up. You see, Siren doesn't just have you pick up an item like any other horror game. No, Siren works more like a point-and-click game. You have to hit the triangle button to open up the list menu. This is going to give you a ton of options later in game, but for now, depending on where you are, you can shout or pick up items. So I grabbed the key and got to the truck, again hitting triangle button first to unlock the door, then again to get into the truck, and again for a third time to start the truck. Next you commit a crime by killing the cop. An earthquake happens right after that, the cop comes back and Kyoya gets shot, and I've just completed the tutorial level. Now the enemies of this game are called Shibito, and by definition Shibito means corpse person or dead person. Shibito aren't mindless zombies, and I think that's what makes them scary. They are intelligent still. You can find them working on things. They'll be patrolling around using flashlights. They all use weapons or tools. They have guns. They reload those guns. The Shibito can even speak and communicate to the character.
Whose little girl are you?
And I think that's what's kind of scary about them. The Shibito clearly have some consciousness still. I found some that were trying to light up a cigarette or watch TV or even prepare and cook food. So why are the Shibito trying to hunt down any human in their village and kill them? To find the answer, you'll have to play the game or skip to the spoiler parts of this video. There are different types of Shibito in game. The Shibito are immortal and can't be killed by the player, but they can be stunned and fall for a few minutes. And depending on the weapon they use, they could be stunned for longer or shorter. A Shibito with a gun will stay down a bit longer than one that uses a melee weapon. I think the most dangerous Shibito are the ones with the rifles. These bastards have laser aim and they hit me before I even realized where they were. Now, Shibito come in different stages, and the later you go into the game, the more you'll be seeing the different stages. There's the dog Shibito that can crawl on all fours, who do more damage and wake up quicker than the first stage Shibito. There are spider Shibitos. These walk on walls and they can be hard to spot when they're on the ceiling. If spiders don't scare you, maybe a fly Shibito might. These Shibitos can obviously fly, but they also have guns, and due to the distance they're at, shooting them down can be difficult, so make sure you keep a flashlight on. Finally, we have the Shibito brain. They usually look a little different and they can act different too. Some choose to run away, and others are more hostile and will attack you when you're spotted. If you knock out a Shibito brain, the other Shibito in the level will be knocked out too. The Shibito brain can communicate with all other Shibitos in the level. You may be wondering, how do people become Shibito? Well, Hanuta Village has something called red water, and this red water is shown after the siren sounds when you beat the first stage. When the siren sounds, all the water in Hanuta Village becomes red water, whether it's rain, a lake, or even from a sink, and the longer you're in contact with the red water, the more likely you'll become a Shibito. That's just some of the gameplay of Siren. I was killed a few times just doing the tutorial mission, so right away I was aware of how little damage these characters can take, and some characters can take more damage, like Shiro can actually take a pretty good ass beating and still make a run for it, while a character like Harume will get a game over screen just by getting caught, and it makes sense. It's in the next level where Siren teaches the player one of the major mechanics of the game, sightjacking. This is something that makes Siren truly unique. Sightjacking is a special power that many of the characters have, giving the player the ability to view through the eyes of another person. Sightjacking doesn't just work on NPCs. For pretty much all of the game, you'll be using it to view through the eyes of the enemy. Siren is a stealth horror game. In the manual it says, in Siren, fighting is almost never your first option. Many characters are unarmed and therefore rely upon stealth to complete their mission objectives. This is what makes sightjacking a really cool mechanic, and you're taught how to use sightjacking by Hisako, a person that Kyoya meets in the second level, and I'll talk more about her later on in the spoiler part of the video. To use sightjacking, the player has to hold down the L2 button and use the left analog stick to search around you. The idea around this is similar to tuning a radio for a clear signal. Eventually you'll find someone and see through the eyes of that person. You can also save up to 4 points of viewing by hitting one of the face buttons on the controller, making it that much easier to switch between them. This is really smart because when you're using the sightjack mode, the player can't move. Using the face button saves time for having to look for that Shibito again, especially because sightjacking works with whatever direction your character's facing. If a Shibito is in front of you but you turn to face right, when you sightjack, you have to push the thumbstick to the left to find that Shibito again. But saving that sightjack to a button will always find that Shibito no matter what direction you're facing. Something else that Siren does well with sightjacking is the player will have a blue crosshair on them no matter where they are on the map, while an NPC or another character will have a green crosshair. This crosshair will always be visible through sightjacking, and it's a clever idea that helped me orient myself on plenty of occasions. Now that we understand how to use sightjacking, we have a big advantage on sneaking past a Shibito. But of course, that's not the only thing the player would use. Siren lets you sneak around with a crouch walk, and it's terrible. I just feel like crouch walking is too slow. Now, when you are crouch walking, no sound can be heard from your footsteps, and this does come in handy because Shibito can hear your footsteps. And in some areas, there are things on the floor that make different sounds. Broken glass is a really common one in the game. Something better than crouching, I think, is just to walk slowly. Tilt the thumbsticks forward just a little bit and the character will begin to walk slowly. Doing this will reduce the sound of footsteps dramatically. I think that crouch walking is still quieter, but the trade-off is that the character is much faster when you're just slowly walking forward. Siren does the player a favor by giving each character a flashlight. This flashlight, however, works as a double-edged sword because the Shibito can spot the character much easier than if the flashlight was off. The obvious trade-off being you can't see a damn thing if you turn the flashlight off. The player doesn't have to worry about finding batteries or any of that bullshit, so use the hell out of that flashlight whenever you need it. But it's just another layer of stealth gameplay that Siren has. Siren also has a first-person mode for some reason. I never used it much because it was so sensitive to how much the camera would move from barely touching the thumbstick, but I'm sure it could have some use for some players. Thankfully, Siren has characters that can actually outrun some of the enemies. Push the thumbstick forward and you're off into a full sprint. But when you are running, you can run into a few walls. I caught myself running into plenty of walls and obstacles, and it's really no big deal, I just thought it was kind of a neat detail. Keep in mind that the game does have a stamina mechanic. No UI means that I had no idea when I was running out of stamina until the character started to slow down and breathe heavily. I actually really like when horror games don't have UI, because it makes me feel like it's a bit more immersive. When the player is spotted, the Shibito will chase after them, trying to attack them. You can outrun the Shibito and they'll stop chasing you once you've taken a few corners and broken the line of sight. They'll stay in the last place they saw you for a short bit, then move back to what they were originally doing. I do like that the game makes it so that the Shibito doesn't stay and hunt down the player for a long time. Something different that Siren does is that health regenerates in this game. You have no health bar or anything that tells you the current state your character is in. The character doesn't limp or grab a part of their body, they just walk off like normal. I can kind of understand this though, because normally 2 hits will kill most, if not all, the characters you play as. Something that I do like about it though is the story does address why these characters' health regenerate, and that's with the use of red water. The red water causes regenerative healing, but at the cost that the more you drink it and the more you're in contact with it, the higher chance and the faster you'll turn into a Shibito. And I think that's really well thought out, that the writers would think this through and not just add regenerative health just for gameplay. Health is important when you're trying to run away after all, but Siren also lets you fight back. Combat in Siren is pretty awful, to be honest. Combat shouldn't be the first thing you should do, and it should be something you'd want to avoid for the most part, but sometimes you have to get into a fight in the game. When you do get into a fight, you have to hold down the R1 button to get into a stance and lock onto the nearest enemy. Then you push or hold the X button. You'll have a quick attack that swings very slowly and a heavy attack that takes a while to charge up, but will do more damage. The Shibito have a few attacks you have to look out for. The worst attack you have to look out for, in my opinion, is the grab. If you're grabbed by a Shibito, shake the thumbstick and you can free yourself from it. This attack is a pain in the ass because you can die very quickly from it. Depending on the Shibito, 3 or 4 attacks is enough to knock them down. Now, be ready because after each hit, they get pushed back a bit, and you can't just spam a second attack out because if you miss, they'll usually get a hit in before you can send out a third attack. Siren has something that I find really annoying, and that's the collision. Whether it's with another character you're escorting or an enemy you just want to get past. It takes so long to get past the enemy when they're in their animation of falling, and it's gotten me killed before. But something I do like is when an enemy is down, your character actually slows down a bit when they're stepping over them, and I think that's a pretty cool detail. But don't worry, short sticks and pokers aren't the only weapons in Siren. Some characters get guns or have guns starting out. A revolver with 6 rounds was a perfect choice I felt because having to reload each round one at a time instead of a faster magazine put a bit of panic in me when I had to stop and reload. To reload, you have to stop running or walking, push the triangle button to pull up the list menu and select reload. Or you can stand still and the character will start reloading automatically. Shooting your gun is similar to melee combat, just hold R1 and hit the X button to shoot. Whether or not you hit your target is up to how far they are and how well you can see them. If you have your flashlight on while you're shooting, your accuracy is increased. The next gun you get is a rifle, and again, similar to the revolver, each round is loaded one at a time. However, unlike the revolver, with the rifle you get a scope to view. When aiming, there are no crosshairs, but just know that the center of the circle is where you're gonna hit. You can also zoom in and out, and aiming with this thing was a nightmare for me, mainly because my thumbsticks were pretty fucked up. Using this thing up close can be a pain in the ass, but you can shoot the rifle pretty quickly, and one shot will down any enemy. A neat detail I noticed in Siren is Naoko will find a revolver later in game, and she actually reloads the weapon slower than Tamon will. This is because she probably doesn't handle guns often, while Tamon has a revolver in his car on the first mission you get to play as him. Now that I've explained a good amount of the controls, I'll move on to the objectives and levels of the game. A few characters will have an NPC with them. They'll follow and listen to your commands you give them by opening the list menu, telling them to run, hide, stop, or follow. If an NPC you're with dies, then you'll fail the mission. This didn't happen often when I was playing. Most of the characters I was escorting were fine. I never really had to worry about them because I can tell them what to do. While they do add a bit more stress, for the most part, they didn't cause much trouble. Except for Miyako. For a good chunk of the game, she'll be sticking with Kyoya, and that's not a problem because you have to escort other NPCs. What makes her different, right? She's blind. She also has the sight jacking ability, and that's how she gets around. So, as the player, if you walk too far from her, she'll just stand there and call for you.
I can't see. Look at me properly.
What you have to do is, if you get too far from her, you'll have to turn around and look at her. Sometimes she won't come after you still because you're still too far away, so you'll have to close the distance. This is simple, but it is annoying because she's slower than Kyoya, and I'm not 100% sure, but I do think NPCs have stamina as well. There's about 10 different stages in the game, with the elementary school being the scariest, I feel, because there aren't many places to hide in there, and if you do get spotted, you can't run very far without being seen by another Shibito. This is a long game, and you'll be revisiting a few of these stages pretty often, but I don't feel like that's a bad thing. I ended up memorizing these stages and locations pretty easily, and I think you will too. Every stage is different, but some of them do have one big similarity, and that's the fog. It's nowhere near as foggy as something like Silent Hill, but Keiichiro Toyama said in an interview that he wanted to create a specific feeling of atmosphere, a small detail like the humidity of Japan. In that same interview, he said that the team also modeled a few of the levels after real haunted locations in Japan. Hanuta itself was inspired by a real abandoned village in Japan. Team Siren would visit this abandoned village called Shiraiwa. I think that this alone shows you how passionate Team Siren was about creating Siren. And I think all that research paid off. Siren has that rural atmosphere around it. A small town, very few cars, unpaved roads, farmland with rice fields, a village with one church and one small area where all the stores and businesses are located. Hanuta village is miles away from any city. For Kyoya to make it there, he needed to take a train ride and a bike only to make it close to the village. Siren does a great job with this setting. Rural areas usually have low population, and that's exactly what you'll find in Hanuta. In a game like Resident Evil 2, you'll find zombies pouring through windows, and that works great for the setting of Resident Evil 2 with Raccoon City. In Siren, you'll find absolutely at most 8 Shibito in a level. And again, it works well for this rural setting. Levels are big, but you're never in a spot that truly feels empty. You'll always be running into a Shibito or having to slip past one. A haunted space where nowhere feels safe, far away from anyone who can help. To add to the atmosphere of Siren, a very quiet and creepy soundtrack is used throughout the game, with songs that slowly raise to a suspenseful high part. The music is very fitting for the game. Some of these songs have chanting, again to add to the cult-like religious group of Siren. Siren has a very good horror soundtrack. It's really well mixed into the game. Hearing the quiet music just added to the anxiety I had walking through the areas I was in. Listening to the footsteps and the music, sightjacking into a Shibito and hearing the groans they made. It was all mixed into a masterpiece that would slowly build the anxiety. Even during a scripted mission where you have to run away from a Shibito at the start, there's no loud or suspenseful music. It's just the player having to run away from a very strong enemy. Now, I might be grasping at straws here, but I like this decision a lot because to me, the quietness of the soundtrack fits the rural setting so well. The loudest thing you're gonna hear in a rural area at night are crickets fucking. Miles and miles away from any city or highway, the silence that Siren gave me was really unsettling. Where a game like Silent Hill 3 has really good music for its setting, but it's actually good music to listen to. A game like Siren has a good soundtrack for its setting, but it's not gonna be on my Spotify list because it's so creepy. And that's a good thing to have in a horror game. This isn't a shot at Silent Hill 3 because these are two very different horror games. It's just kinda neat the way Siren handles its music. At the start of every mission you'll have a map, and you may notice that there is no mark on the map to know where the player currently is, or even where the NPC that might be with you is. And I like this decision. I think it's well done that the game has you memorize its landmarks. The game already has some landmarks marked out for you, so you can kind of get an idea where you are, but if you have an NPC with you, and you have them hide, don't forget where they are because they're not going to be showing up on the map, and you can't just call them unless you're close enough for them to hear you. Most of the stages in the game are pretty big, but a lot of them have very tight claustrophobic areas. This might be where collision comes in and bites you in the ass. Even though a lot of the stages are really big, the game does try to guide you a bit. On the first mission with Tamon, I tried to cross the main bridge to take a shortcut and was shot by a sniper before I even knew what was happening. I think it's fine that the game guides you a bit, but for the most part you are free to roam wherever you want if you can get past the Shibito. Each stage has 2 objectives, but you're given them one at a time. An objective can be something simple like taking yourself and the NPC character you might be with from the start of the level to another part to exit that level, or something like clear this level with this character in under 2 minutes. And it can even be something vague like find the letter. And most of these objectives affect things in other characters' levels. At the start of Siren, you'll be playing each stage in the order that the game planned. After a few stages, you'll be given free access to the Link Navigator. And this thing fucking sucks! Through the Link Navigator, the player is shown every mission that has been played, and the next stage that hasn't been played yet. You even get access to past cutscenes if you happen to miss one. I think that's a really cool idea. I was so confused using the Link Navigator for the first quarter of the game. Because the Link Navigator is such a pain in the ass, Siren gives you a help page to help you learn how to use the Link Navigator and how it works. This is helpful, but it's not as helpful as you might think. When you're trying to play another stage, it might be unplayable because something hasn't been done with another character to progress the story. See, Siren is kind of like a huge puzzle. A very large and difficult puzzle. It's what makes Siren unique. Something done with one character will affect the progress of another character, and if you miss something that the game needs the player to find, then the game won't progress until you find it. The items or the things the player might need to continue the story doesn't have to be one of the main 2 objectives. This is because some missions in the game have hidden objectives that need to be completed, so that way another character is able to complete their mission in the story later on. I'll go over this all again in a minute, but you might be able to see how this is a bit hard to follow, or I'm making it worse. When I was reading about the Link Navigator, it mentioned something like a locked icon with a colon next to the words locked icon. I thought it would show a padlock or something like that, but nothing shows up. That's because the word locked appears when you're trying to go to the next level. But to even see the word locked, you have to lock the cursor on the stage that's unplayable, or on a stage that I couldn't complete the second mission on. And I know this sounds confusing, and me doing a bastardized version of explaining it doesn't help, but don't worry, it'll all make sense in a minute. Once you figure out how to lock the cursor by hitting L1, you can freely look around the Link Navigator without having to select another mission. If you're trying to unlock another stage, the cursor will have a yellow triangle pointing the player to where a key stage is. This is where the hidden objective is. So let's say for objective 2 of this mission, you have to get a tool in this building, but you can't get into it because something's blocking the door. So you go to the other side of the building to find the door that's stuck open, but the character can't fit through it. What you do is go back to the Link Navigator by pausing the game, hit L1 on the mission you're on, and you'll see the word locked. Next, you'll have to follow the yellow arrow to a key objective in someone else's stage. Play as that character, squeeze through the back door to unjam the front door. Now, you can go back and complete objective 2 of the original character you were playing as. That's how the Link Navigator works in game, and I think it's so poorly done how the game explains how to use the Link Navigator. I had to watch a YouTube video just to understand it, and I'll leave that video in the description in case you want to understand it better too. Even in Siren's own manual, the Link Navigator has 3 pages of instructions on how to use it. There are things I wish it would do better, like I wish I can zoom out and see all the levels easier, but you can't. The thing that saved the Link Navigator for me was the fact that you can lock the cursor with the L1 button and look around freely. With that being said, the Link Navigator was the most annoying part of the game for me. Some objectives need tools or items to be found in order to complete that stage. Items aren't too hard to miss, but it can happen. There are some items that aren't needed for puzzles, but can give a good amount of backstory on Hanuta Village and the characters. These items are called archives, and I really like the archives because they give you the history of Hanuta and some of the people who lived and worked there, and even some background on some of the Shibito on who they were before all this happened. And I think that's great world building. As for the other items, usually when a camera angle changes, an important item might be there for a future puzzle even when I couldn't see it. The game does give you a tip at the beginning of every mission for something that might help you progress the game, but a lot of times the tips can be really vague, like pay attention to the locked door. What door? Like I said earlier, Siren is a big, difficult puzzle, and an example of this is Day 1 for Tamon Mission 2, Find Item Dropped by Yuriko. The item you're looking for is Yuriko's student ID. To get her ID, you need to be playing as Tamon. You get to a small shrine where Yuriko's ID is, and you shoot the lock so you can get her ID from the shrine. Well, there's something you have to do before playing as Tamon so the lock can break. You have to play as Kei. You play a mission where the hint is to search around the small shrine. And at first I thought I solved this because when I go near the small shrine, the camera angle changes. When the angle changed, I had the person I was escorting through the level hide, and she found a key behind the shrine. That made me think that I had found what I was looking for. Well, that was wrong, because what you're supposed to do is find this tiny ass rock next to the shrine, use that stone to hit the lock, but that won't cause the lock to break, it causes the stone to shatter. Now that lock is weak enough to be destroyed by Tamon in a completely different level. The key that was found is still useful, but that key would be used on something completely different later on in the game. To be fair to Siren, when you do complete a hidden objective, text will appear at the bottom of the screen informing you that the requirements have been met for a certain character, and that character can continue with the story and can complete Mission 2 now. Yes, it was my fault for missing the stone, and also my fault for not figuring out I had completed the requirements for a completely different level that wasn't finding the item dropped by Yuriko. This was the only time that happened to me in Siren, but be prepared to replay missions because it was easy for me to miss some requirements, and that may or may not be the case for you. As someone who's not a big fan of having to replay levels or having to replay the entire game with a different character for just a little bit more context in the story, having to replay the levels in Siren to complete requirements didn't bother me, and I'm not sure why. I like to think it's because I've outgrown that mindset, but also I think it's because Siren's levels were really easy to remember. I had memorized the patterns and placements of the Shibito, I knew where a lot of the interesting spots were in some levels. That and using the map to your advantage, you can figure out a lot of points of interest to help you solve most of these puzzles. I think the most famous of these puzzles is collecting the ID holder. This is an ID that belongs to Kyoya. To get the ID holder, you have to be playing as Shiro. You have to get into a dining room, but there's a police Shibito in there with a gun, and the door to get to him is locked. There's another door, but opening it will cause the Shibito to notice you and shoot you. So what you have to do is play as Kei. Go into the building and find the freezer. Plug that freezer into the wall and now you're done, right? No. You have to go find a face towel in somebody's shed. However, that shed has a lock on it so you can't get into it. What luck, a bunch of numbers on the wall. That must be the combination, right? Wrong. You then have to go into the house next to the shed, find a radio, tune that radio to match the numbers outside on the wall, and after all that, you'll get a new set of numbers from the radio.
5, 3, 0, 5.
Use them numbers to unlock the padlock, grab the face towel, take it all the way back to the freezer, but before you put it into the freezer, you have to wet it first and then you can leave the level. After all that, you can play as Shiro, then go into the building where the ID holder is, grab the towel from the freezer, place it on top of two objects, then there's a piggy bank that's conveniently placed nearby, grab the piggy bank and put it on top of the towel. Then you can leave, the towel will thaw, the piggy bank will fall and shatter. This causes the Shibito to go investigate, then you can go through the main door and grab the ID holder. Pretty convoluted, right? Well, don't worry, if you have the IQ of a brick like I do, you can completely miss the whole towel situation and just shatter the piggy bank, get shot, wait for the Shibito to reload, then beat the shit out of him and grab the wallet. Thank you, Team Siren, for keeping people like me in mind when you made these puzzles. Siren's objectives are interesting. The one that was pretty annoying to me was find a letter. I like to think my thought process behind this was pretty normal. Where would a letter be? In the mailbox. So I checked every mailbox, and nothing. So I went into every building that I could and looked at every counter and every corner, but nothing. Where could it be? It was on the fucking roof of a shed. I don't know why or how. Maybe they send these things through carrier pigeon? But why would it be up there? In the game's manual, it actually gives you a tip on this. You'll find a few tips of some levels in the manual, so in case you ever get stuck, use that. So I think I've given an idea on what kind of difficulty Siren has, whether it's the difficult puzzles, the characters with low health, or them damn snipers. But Siren was made like this on purpose. You see, the director of Siren, Keiichiro Toyama, wanted Siren to be difficult from the start, saying that Siren's difficulty was one of the things I was aiming for from the start. I thought it would be nice to have a hard game like old times. I was imagining Namco's Tower of Duraga at the time, but there was that one game you first managed to get through because everyone brought their own knowledge to the table, right? I wondered if we could reproduce that feeling of everyone getting excited about it over such a diffused internet. At the time of Tower of Duraga, information spread throughout the community by word of mouth, or notes left at arcades. I wondered whether that kind of atmosphere could be created again on the internet. To do this, I didn't want the kind of difficulty that would let people skillfully progress through it alone. Also, with Siren, it's true that it was kind of hard to fine-tune the system and also the difficulty of Siren. There's no on-screen health gauge at all, but for example, if you allow them to take one more shot from a sniper, they'll be able to slip through using brute force. There's also no kinds of healing item in the game, so we struggled with dropping the difficulty without destroying the balance. I was trying to simulate the exchange of people telling each other how they made it through each part, so the difficulty was something I was quite insistent upon. This is what makes Siren really unique. Siren is very difficult, and though you may not have a big community of people to help you figure out each puzzle, you do have internet guides, and that's what I use for this game, and I feel no shame from it. I know it's possible to beat Siren without a guide, and for me, I played almost half of it without one. But Siren isn't a short game. It took me about 18 hours to finish and 23 hours to finish it 100%. But the way I would recommend playing Siren is, play it as far as you can. Win, and if you get stuck, open up a guide. There are plenty of them online and some very helpful YouTube videos that walk me through some of the puzzles. How else was I supposed to find that damn letter? And once you're done, or once you've completed that puzzle, continue going at it blind. This is how I played it. A lot of these puzzles can be figured out on your own, and some of them I thought were stupid, but after completing them, I would look back at the puzzle and think, oh yeah, that makes sense. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is saving and checkpoints. Now, I haven't played many horror games, but the few that I have usually have manual saving and saving locations, like a safe room. Siren does have manual saving, only after you've completed a stage though. Siren does use checkpoints, something I wasn't expecting but I'm kinda glad they had, because some of these stages can take a while to complete. You have no notification where or when a checkpoint was done, but for the most part I feel that the checkpoints were well placed out. The only thing that can be difficult about checkpoints is when you find an archive. If you happen to die, you will always, no matter what, have to find that archive again. So if you're looking for one specific archive, you have to find it, make it to the end of the mission, and not get killed at any point. This isn't that hard to do, but if your sole goal is to get an archive to 100% the game, or learn more about the story and characters, it can be a bit repetitive, especially when you see how long it takes for some of these characters to die. I think it's fitting that these characters are trying to fight and stay alive during these last few seconds of life, and I think it's better than having just a boring falling animation into a game over screen, but like I said, it can be annoying watching these 10-second plus death animations when your sole goal is to grab something quick for some backstory. It can also be a problem if you're trying to get these archives and you're escorting a character. Like I said, if that character dies, then it's game over, and you'll be set back to the checkpoint needing to recollect the archive again. Now, there's actually some differences between the regions of the game. It's really just censorship and changes of the NTSC version of the game. Both the PAL and Japanese version of the game are all uncensored. They censor 2 suicides in the game, and they raise some of the characters' ages up. Kyoya, who is 18 in the NTSC version of the game, is 16 in all the other versions. Miyako is 17 in the NTSC version of the game and 14 in all the others. And Tomoko is 17 in the NTSC version, but she's also 14 in all the other versions. Something else that the NTSC version does that's really stupid is it removes some of the description on some of the archives you may have collected. As far as I know, it's only on one item, but it's such an important item that I don't know what the fuck they were thinking removing it. The item is Archive 21, Kyoya's student ID. In the NTSC version, you have nothing else but a student ID and a small description. In every other version of the game, you can press X to get more information about it. This leads you into a small memo inside of Kyoya's ID with a website written on it, www.occultland.com. This small bit was removed, and this gives you hints on why Kyoya is even in Hanuta in the first place. Why the hell such a cool feature was removed from the game is beyond me, but it showed me just how creative of a game Siren was. Unfortunately, the website is now taken down, but don't rip the RAM out of your PC just yet, because the Internet Archive has our back, and I'll leave a link to the website in the description. I want to give credit to Infinite Retry as well, because that's how I learned about the missing information in the archive. Because during my research, I read why Kyoya had came to Hanuta, I just couldn't find any tips about it anywhere in game. I knew of occultland.com from researching Siren, but where did other people learn it from? And because of Infinite Retry's video, it's that I learned it was removed from the NTSC version of the game for some reason. Her video will also be in the description. I'm going to go over the story of Siren now, and I'm going to spoil it. So if you haven't played Siren yet, but want to, skip this part of the video. If you don't care about playing a 19-hour horror game, then allow me to ruin it by bastardizing this fun horror story. I'm going to do my best to talk about the story of Siren. Just know that the story of this game is confusing as fuck, but I'm going to try it anyways, and if I do get something wrong, please correct me. I'll also be telling you about each character and what their fate was at the end of the game. In the forum of occultland.com, someone got lost near Hanuta village when they seen what looked to be bloodstained clothing on the floor and quickly drove away afterwards. In that same forum, we learn of a village where 33 people were massacred by one young man in one night. This village would then disappear after a landslide in the 70s and may have merged with Hanuta village. In this forum, we learn about a person who goes by the name SDK who has an interest in this ghost town. They mention that they'll pay a visit to this ghost town going by train as close as they can and then using a bike to finish the journey. That's how we learn how and why Kyoya is there. Hisako Yao is the first important non-playable character we meet. A nun of the Mana religion, she's the one that shows the player how to use sightjacking. Before becoming a nun, she was a maid for the Kajiro family. Miyako Kajiro is part of the Kajiro family, a wealthy and important family in Hanuta, a very religious family following the Mana religion and their god. It's because of this they're believed to have the blessings of their god, with all of the Kajiro family having a long lifespan. And sometimes a special family member is born with the ability to see visions and they're treated better than the others. And I'm pretty sure that this is just the ability to sightjack, but if I'm wrong, please correct me. Miyako has that ability to sightjack. Miyako also has a brother named Jun Kajiro. He was the person who spotted Kyoya at the ceremony in the beginning of the game. Now that we have most of the important characters out of the way, I guess the best way to explain the story is from starting off at the very beginning before the game even takes place. And again, if you've made it this far and you want to play the game, this is the last warning because this is pretty much endgame spoilers here. Then we'll work our way to 2003 where the game takes place. And I'm not going to go through each day of each character walking through every level because a lot of it is unnecessary for the story. I'm just cutting some of the fat. Okay, so bear with me. In 684 AD, yeah, we're going that far back, Hanuta was suffering from a famine, and coincidentally, a giant fish alien fell from the sky. The villagers of Hanuta were already starving, so they ate the fish alien monster from the sky. They ate it alive. Dadatsushi was the name of this alien, and before dying, it let out a scream that sounded like a siren. Now you understand the name of the game. It's with that scream that Dadatsushi cursed one of the villagers to be immortal up until the point where Dadatsushi was resurrected. All of this is played out through cutscenes throughout the game, but it's left a bit vague to give the player incentive to collect all of the archives. Who was the villager who was cursed with immortality? Well, in Archive 30, it says that there was a woman who lived for 800 years because she ate the flesh of a merman. never losing her beauty and wandering the land dressed as a nun. That's pretty much on the nose for clues, but throughout the game it's pretty obvious that it's Hisako. Archive 49 is a folk story from Hanuta, and in that story it again hints at a fish-like god, falling from the sky to be eaten by a girl, only for that girl to promise the god she will bring that fish back. Even Akira Shimura was onto Hisako. In Archive 34, he has a diary saying that no one has caught on to that woman's true nature. She's a monster that has been watching over the town for years and never aging. It also says that she'll bring disaster to the village. The next major event was a landslide that Hanuta suffered in 1976. In 1976, a ceremony was being held to bring back Daratsushi. Failing to do so caused a landslide that completely wiped out parts of Hanuta. This was the same landslide that killed both of Tamon's parents, and as Tamon gets older, he learns more of the Mana religion, questioning why people of Hanuta would worship a sea god when the villagers of Hanuta and Hanuta itself is far from the sea and is surrounded by mountains. All of this is in Archive 46. As you play through the game, you'll have a cutscene of young Tamon with his family when the landslide hits. The 1976 ceremony failed due to a number of reasons, but the one that I like the most is that Hisako just forgot about Daratsushi. A part of this is explained in Archive 83, but a lot more of this is explained in one of the short stories of the game called Strange Tales of Hanuta. These stories were published on the official Japanese website of the game and were never translated until a few years ago by fans. But I'm going to give you a short synopsis of this specific part of the story. Hisako was a maid for the Kajiro family. In 1967, a baby is born from the Kajiro family, and this baby has the Shining. the sight-jacking ability. That baby would be named Miyako Kajiro, but not the Miyako we meet in the beginning of the game because they're different. Kind of. Anyway, Hisako now goes by the name Sumiko. She pretty much raises baby Miyako until she's ready to be sacrificed to bring back their god. Miyako was kept isolated from anyone and never meeting or getting to know her own parents. The day of the ceremony, Hisako felt guilt for Miyako and helped her escape, only later to remember why the fuck she was doing the ceremony to begin with. But by that point it was already too late and the ceremony had failed. This caused Daratsushi to let out a siren scream, causing Shibito to come out, and that caused the landslide of 1976. After returning to the ceremony, Hisako regains her memories and catches back up to Miyako at the hospital, only for Hisako to strap Miyako to a steel chair and a blindfold on for the rest of her life. This Miyako might be immortal too, I think, so it's gonna be a long wait. And now I can get to the current events of the game. With Kyoya now escaped from the Shibito, he hears a girl scream outside of the church. He then goes out to help, and it turns out to be Miyako crying for her dog that's just been killed. Kyoya tries to comfort her, and Miyako's brother Jun shows up to try to bring her back to the ceremony. Miyako knocks his ass out with a stick, very cool, and she accompanies Kyoya throughout the game. Miyako also has one more sibling, and that's her sister Ayako Kajiro. She's also Jun's fiance. And I don't know if that's just a funny bit by the creators to take a hit at people who live in rural areas, but it's a pretty good bit. I already explained why Tamon is in Hanuta and why Yuriko is following him, so for now I'm gonna explain a few of the other characters because Tamon is a really important character and I want to save his bit of the story for the last of the main story. This also goes for a few of the other characters, but when something important comes up, I will mention it. I'm also going to shine some light on the other characters that are playable, but I haven't talked about much. Kei Makino is a priest of the Mana religion, and on the second mission, you get to play as him. You have to escort Tomoko, who runs away from home, and I only mention this mission because at the end of that mission, Kei gets shot at by a sniper and gets separated from Tomoko, and abandons her. I tried to go back for her and got killed, so I ran away the second time. I'll continue the story by talking about Kei's twin brother, Shiro. When the player is introduced to him, Shiro has just woken up after passing out on the floor in the middle of the woods. After waking up, he anxiously examines a hole that's next to him. This hole is important, but don't worry, I'll mention it later. This mission is really simple. Find a weapon and exit the level. This is how a lot of the early stages go. We're going from one twin to a completely other set of twins. Risa Onda is looking for her twin sister, Mina Onda. Remember that hole I mentioned 15 seconds ago? That's where Mina was. You see, Mina Onda was a nurse working with Shiro. She fell in love with him, one thing led to another, she got pregnant with his baby, he wasn't too crazy about that, so he went crazy and strangled Mina. Risa then runs into Shiro, of all people, right? Asking him where her sister is, and he explained that he's looking for Mina as well. Get it? Cause she should be in the fucking hole! Both Shiro and Risa end up at the Miyata clinic where Mina worked. Risa then notices something outside, it turns out to be Mina, and she's not looking too good. She's already turned into a Shibito, but disappears as soon as Shiro comes to check out the window. Kei also shows up at the clinic asking if Shiro or Mina had seen the girl we abandoned during his mission. And after some time, for some reason, Risa decides it's a good idea to look for Mina alone in this scary-ass hospital. And that decision would pay off because she finds Mina alright. Mina is now an evolved Shibito, having now become a Shibito brain. So Risa has to find a way to get Shiro and Kei's attention while avoiding Mina. Risa hits the alarm in the hospital and here comes Kei to the rescue. But if abandoning Tomoko didn't make you realize that Kei is kind of a fuck up, this will because he doesn't even try to attack Mina to save Risa, he just powers down. But this just made me relate to him a little bit more because I am no braver of a man than he. To be fair to Kei, Mina did have a shovel and she does look scary. But Shiro comes to save the day and throws a bottle of Prime at Mina. Shiro even reassures Kei that he isn't used to dealing with Shibito and that he shouldn't feel down about it. What a good brother. Of course, the writers of Siren can't make Kei look too good, so Shiro gives chase after Mina and loses her. Later, Kei and Risa are in a room waiting for Shiro to return, when all of a sudden Mina shows up and knocks Kei out. Now, with nothing stopping Mina, she walks up to Risa and rubs her face against hers, and shows Risa her past memories of when they were kids and when Shiro strangled Mina from her point of view. The next time we see Risa, she's now a Shibito running into Shiro, and Shiro does what he does best. Strangles her. But Risa is now a Shibito, so she can't die, and Shiro seems a little annoyed by that.
Just leave me alone.
The goal of this mission was to find and defeat Mina, and after doing that, Shiro ties down Mina and Risa and dissects them both to learn more about the Shibito. Kei comes in after hearing the screams of the two sisters, and Kei leaves right afterwards, being disgusted by what he just noticed. I'll come back to the two brothers later. Eventually, after a few different stages and some repeating ones, I was able to play as Reiko Takato in Hanuta Elementary School. Reiko is a teacher at the school, and in Archive 48, I learned there was an event going on at school to see a comet that flies by Earth every 333 years. In that flyer, it's recommended to bring a flashlight, so I assume that's why Reiko was there so late. But she's not alone because she's with her student, Harumi Yomoda. A little backstory on Reiko, in Archive 53 it says during summer a swell hit the coastline of a beach and some kids were swept away. 2 kids in particular were saved because of Reiko Takato. Unfortunately, Reiko's own daughter wasn't found until it was already too late. It's because of that and the fact that Harume's parents were killed in a car accident that both Reiko and Harume have a mother-daughter bond going on throughout the game. And Reiko does a really good job at this, trying to keep a calm and brave face for Harume. Harume says she has a secret friendship with Miyako and that they're like secret sisters. Reiko then asks if she can be Harume's secret mom, and again this is cementing the bond that these two have with each other. It's in this same mission that we see the dedication Reiko has for Harume, because she has Harume hide in a cart being pulled by a Shibito. By hiding in this cart, Harume can slip past multiple Shibito, but that Shibito pulling the cart feels something moving and decides to check it out. Reiko then makes a distraction by hitting the horn of a truck that's nearby, then she makes the ultimate sacrifice by blowing herself up with the fuel in that truck. This gives Harume plenty of time to run and hide into an abandoned house. I'll come back to Harume in a bit because she's also a very important character. Now on to another character I haven't mentioned much, and that's Naoko Mihama. Just a quick recap, she wanted to become a big TV star and things were going well for her for a while. In Archive 6, she was interviewed and she was part of a really popular drama, Eat Your Heart Out. Unfortunately, over time, the fame would begin to fade, and now she's part of a small TV show called Occult Japan. Now that we're caught up with Naoko, I can end her story here because she really doesn't add much to the overall story of the game. Her story alone, though, is pretty sad. When I first played as her, she had just gotten separated from her TV crew, and Akira Shimura, the old man with the rifle, meets Naoko. And now I'll give Akira this, he knew from the start who's at fault for this whole thing. And he says this in front of Naoko.
It's all her fault. She hasn't aged in all these years. Yaobakuni. She's a monster.
I only mention this because it's important for Naoko's story in a bit. Later, when playing as Naoko again, she's surprised that while going through Gojaku Peak, the mining stage, that she somehow ended up back at the beginning. And this was something I didn't notice until rewatching the footage, and I think it's actually clever foreshadowing. I'll explain this later. Her last stage is in Hanuda Elementary School, and she escapes from there. But Hanuda has taken its toll on her.
I did it!
After a few missions with other characters, we come visit Naoko one last time where she takes a dip into the red water. While doing so, she keeps repeating the words eternal youth. Akira mentioned that there's a woman who never ages, and so with the stress of being an actress and losing some of her fame, I imagine she blames her aging for this, and that's really sad, and this will be the last time we get to play as Naoko. Now, I'll ask you to remember Tomoko. She's the girl that Kei abandoned earlier in the story. Tomoko's parents are now looking for her, and they ended up at the church where Hisako is. Hisako tells them to wait at the church and wait for their daughter while she goes out to look for Tomoko. Well, Tomoko is on her own and she's still in the area where Kei abandoned her. And I'll mention this, mission 2 of this stage is such a pain in the ass because you have to finish the mission in 1 minute and 55 seconds and the timings were so tight when you had to run or when a Shibito isn't looking. I'm not joking when I say I beat this stage with 1 second remaining. Later on, Tomoko is discovered by Hisako and she takes Tomoko to see her parents, but got separated somehow. I have no idea how, I don't think this is explained in the story. Later on in her story, she sees lights in the sky and what she calls angels floating around, and it's here that we see the fate of Naoko, now a Shibito. When you finish Tomoko's stage, she reunites with her parents at the church, banging on the windows asking them to let her inside. But at this point, it's already too late. She too is becoming a Shibito. And something cool that the game does to give you hints that this is happening is in this stage, none of the Shibito attack Tomoko. You can walk right up to them or right by them and stand in front of them. It's just something I thought was pretty neat. Tomoko is now a Shibito, but shortly after that her parents turn into a Shibito too. So I mean, it's not all that bad. And they become a family of Shibito living in the abandoned house. Harume just so happens to be hiding in the closet in that same house, and now that I think about it, I think that this is the scariest mission in the game, because while the house is big, you're playing as little Harume, and she can't fight or run all that fast, so you're just trying to sneak by while 3 Shibito roam the halls in this house. It's really stressful. But once Harume makes it out of that house and is able to escape, she hears a familiar voice.
Harume. Mrs.?
Don't go off by yourself anymore.
No!
So now I can talk about Akira Shimura's story. I already talked about how he was ahead of the curve, knowing that somehow Hisako is to blame for what's happening. I also explained that he was born in Hanuda and left just outside of the village after his wife and son died in the landslide of 1976. Akira comes back to Hanuda, and after running into Naoko, he ends up on a lookout tower staring at an old photograph of his wife and son, wondering if they were the ones calling him back to the village. At that moment, he hears Yuriko scream and she's being chased by a Shibito, and again, I have no idea when she got separated from Tamon, but here we are. After saving Yuriko, they both notice a few Shibito standing in red water, and this is because before they were Shibito, they were doing a different kind of ceremony. In Archive 36, it says a ceremony dates back to ancient times where participants who submerge themselves in red water are considered to receive the blessings of the gods and have been cleansed of any sin, only now to become Shibito because of Dadatsushi's planned resurrection. Akira, now knowing what's happening, knows that there is no escape from this hell. He decides to commit suicide in order to avoid becoming a Shibito. But this is Siren, so that doesn't work out so well. So a few hours later, after shooting himself, he gets up fully healed and realizes that yes, There really is no escape from this hell. He too is now a Shibito. Now, I don't know why, but the NTSC release of the game censors this, and it only shows a close-up of Yuriko's face and hearing a gunshot going off. In any other version, you can see Akira putting the gun in his mouth, and then the camera angle changes to a close-up of Yuriko. This isn't the only bit of censorship the game has, and I'll get to the next part when we get to it in the story. Finally, I am now going to talk about Tamon and Kyoya, and while I haven't finished all the endings for some of the other characters, they're all going to meet up here at the end of the story. And I wanted to talk about Tamon and Kyoya here last because I think that they're the main characters of the story. Kyoya especially, so I wanted to have them kind of close together here at the end. I'm also going to talk about Yuriko, who is also a pretty big part of the story, but is an NPC throughout the whole game. Just a quick recap, Tamon has came back to Hanuta to find out the mysteries behind the ceremony that may have caused the landslide that took his parents' life back in 1976. Yuriko joins her professor because I'm pretty sure she has a crush on him. In her ID, she has a photo of him, and she tells her parents that she'll be going with her professor to help him on his research on the village. This is in Archive 35. The start of Tamon's story is in a cutscene a few hours into the game. We can see him as a young boy with his parents watching television when the house begins to shake. Later in another cutscene, we see Tamon wandering around what's left of Hanuta village alone without his parents. But when we first meet Tamon in game, he just arrived back at Hanuta with Yuriko. At the same time, both of them sightjack each other, and this is the start of their story. With Tamon's knowledge of Hanuta, he tells Yuriko not to drink the water. She does it anyways. It does look good. Tamon tells her to only listen to him while they're in Hanuta. A few hours later, Tamon and Yuriko are on a bridge contemplating doing evil things, when Tamon mentions that he made this mark on a railing when he was a kid, and now telling Yuriko that he was born in Hanuta and left when both of his parents were killed. Tamon also apologizes to Yuriko for getting her involved with everything that's happening. She tells him not to apologize because she was the one that wanted to follow him anyways. Just then, a shot rings out, hitting Yuriko and causing her to fall off the bridge. Though she's not dead, and after Tamon checks up on her, he then goes after the person who shot her. And would you look who it is? It's a now Shibito Akira. Tamon recognizes Akira because he has a photo of himself with his parents, with Akira also being in that same photo. And I'll pick back up here when I caught up with Kyoya because these two stories are about to converge. After Kyoya meets with Miyako, he helps her escape from her brother, who wants to take Miyako back to the ceremony so that way it can be completed. After the two get away, they rest at the abandoned house that Tomoko and her family would later be in. Kyoya asks Miyako what's the deal with Hanuta village and the Shibito, and something Miyako's brother Jun mentioned about the other side. Miyako cuts to the chase and says she doesn't like the village either, and tells Kyoya not to worry and that she won't let him turn into one of them. Both Miyako and Kyoya then rest for the night. But at some point Miyako gets up and cuts her hand, and she also cuts Kyoya's hand while he's sleeping. She then grabs his bloody hand with her own hand, and the reason she does this is because she can't turn into a Shibito. And I think it's because of her blood, so she's sharing some of her blood with Kyoya, so that way he can't turn into Shibito. After a few hours, the Shibito start to move in on the house and the two escape. As they're getting away, both Kyoya and Miyako notice a light in the sky. This is the start of Dadatsushi's resurrection. And it's actually the same lights in the sky that Tomoko sees when she notices the angels. This started because Hisako received the head of Dadatsushi. This was written in Archive 66. One day, villagers saw a floating boat in the river. They dragged it onto the bank and found a strange woman inside. A woman with white hair was holding onto a box that was very important to her. In this cutscene, we can see that inside the box was Dadatsushi's head, and so now the resurrection can truly begin. Both Kyoya and Miyako's goal is to escape, and to do that they have to defeat a Shibito brain. But before that, remember that cop that was chasing Kyoya at the very beginning of the game? He's back! And now he's a fly Shibito. Also, he wasn't a Shibito at the start of the game, he was just drunk. And then he died after Kyoya ran him over, only to become a Shibito after the siren rang. After defeating the Shibito brain, Miyako informs Kyoya that all of Hanuta village is now in another dimension between reality and the underworld. Kyoya, being upbeat, reassures Miyako that both of them are gonna get out of there, only to be shot seconds later by Jun. showing you that being upbeat and positive in a terrible situation will only get you shot. After Kyoya was shot, Hisako shows up to take both Miyako and June to the start of Dadatsushi's resurrection. This is where the stories start to converge. After being shot, Yuriko stands back up but is dazed and doesn't get very far before passing out. A few feet away from her, Kyoya is just barely hanging on before he passes out as well too. The two are then discovered by Hanuda's favorite doctor, Shiro. For the first time in Hanuda's history, Shiro does something helpful by not strangling anyone, but he also gives Yuriko a blood transfusion. Now, I'm pretty sure that this could be Kyoya's blood, or maybe Miyako's from some other time. Yuriko then wakes up and asks Shiro a couple of questions, and he just tells her that she's on her own. Her and Kyoya now leave the hospital shortly after Shiro does. Tamon, having no idea that Yuriko left the hospital, is trying to track her down. After looking through the hospital, he finds Mina. 5 quick shots later, Mina goes down and Tamon finds Yuriko's glasses. Both Yuriko and Kyoya now make their way to the village only to find out that the Shibito are constructing a nest for when Dadatsushi returns. The nest is built around something called a mirror pool, and this is where Miyako will be sacrificed and the source of all of the red water comes from. Don't think I've forgotten about my friend Kei, because I haven't, but if you have, he's the coward of the two twin brothers. He's witnessing the resurrection of Dadatsushi, with Miyako now laying on the mirror pool, and the resurrection has now begun. Miyako is burned and sacrificed, but also for some reason Miyako's sister, Ayako too. I really don't know why, but fuck it, it's insurance in case things go bad. During this time, Tamon breaks into the nest to find out that he's too late to stop what's happening. At the same time, Yuriko and Kyoya arrive. Dadatsushi is now revived and causing a big mess. I mean, look at him. After being attacked by Dadatsushi, Kyoya, Tamon, and Kei are knocked out, and Kyoya has a dream of Miyako, where she says she wishes everyone in the village would just disappear. Not long after Tamon, Kei, and Kyoya regain consciousness, Tamon and Kyoya decide to push deeper into the nest to try to stop Dadatsushi. Kei, on the other hand, he's not in the highest of spirits. It's also during this time that Harume makes her way through the nest. After doing so, she's clearly worn down and decides to rest again. Just as Harume is resting, Kei is walking toward her. Not knowing if he's a Shibito or not, she decides to hide. Kei, never even noticing her, finds his brother Shiro there. Shiro then tells the truth to Kei that he was jealous of him, and that he always wanted to be Kei. Shiro then tells him that his part is done and he doesn't want to be a monster. Then the camera switches to Kei with a shocked face and a gunshot can be heard before Shiro drops his flashlight.
I don't want to be a monster.
This is the second time the NTSC version of the game censors something out. Shiro points his pistol to his head when he says this, and then the camera angle changes. But in the NTSC version, this is never shown. Now, I'll forgive you if you think Shiro dies here, because I did too. But he actually turns the gun on Kei and shoots him. He then pulls a hitman and switches clothing with him. Now, I'm pretty sure that Shiro was jealous of his brother because Shiro wanted to become a priest. And like, come on man, you're a doctor. You're the only one in the fucking village. We need you here. Anyways, after switching outfits with his now dead brother, Shiro runs into Kyoya and hands him an item that he'll need to defeat Dadatsushi. This item is called the Yurien. Shiro actually got it from a secret room in the hospital where you can find 1976 Miyako. Remember that Hisako imprisoned this Miyako back in 1976. Because she can't die and can't turn into a Shibito, she's just been sitting here waiting. Why Hisako didn't use the 1976 Miyako to bring back her god instead of killing the new one? I really don't know, I'm sorry. Can you tell me? After all of that, Shiro now wants to save the people of Hanuda and the Shibito by finding some dynamite. And guess who we see along the way during this mission? Our old friend Akira, who is now a fly Shibito. After finding the dynamite, Shiro goes through the mines of Hanuda, running into Mina and Risa. Shiro uses a stake to keep Risa down and blows debris into Mina. Shiro now reaches a sea inside of Hanuda that's being held back by a dam. He then uses a dynamite to destroy the dam, and Shiro notices that there are Shibito that have resisted the call of the Siren to become full Shibito. These people have suffered under the sea of red water for decades. This is when Shiro decides to free these people from their suffering. Shiro decides to give his life up using the flames from the second Yurien to free the souls of the people who are resisting the call of the Siren. Before dying, he notices both Mina and Risa waving at him. Shiro walks towards them and falls into a flaming hole that was caused by the Yurien. And that's the end of Shiro. With Shiro's story taken care of, we're back with Tamon, Kyoya, Harume, and Yuriko. Tamon is pushing deeper into the nest again to try to stop Dadatsushi. He collapses somewhere on his way, and it's Yuriko who notices him first. She calls out to him, but before they can get close, Dadatsushi interrupts them and flies between them. After that, a flood of red water washes over all three of them, separating them. This was caused by Shiro when he blew up the dam wall. It's in this next level with Tamon that we see what's become of Naoko, and she's evolved even further into a dog Shibito. Also in this level, we can see what's become of Reiko, and she's evolved even further past that to become a Shibito brain. After getting past her, Tamon discovers Shiro's lab coat that's now burned. Eventually, after traveling through the nest, Tamon ends up at his childhood home. Inside, he finds his parents. Tamon drops to his knees, hugging both of his parents. Kyoya now makes his way through the nest and ends up at the mirror pool where he sees a reflection of Miyako. She invites him through, and Kyoya now enters Dadatsushi's world. Once Kyoya is in there, he comes face to face with Hisako, only to have to fight a now Shibito Jun. This fight was a pain in the ass, by the way. After Kyoya defeats Jun, he now takes Jun's katana, because why not? And now the final fight with Dadatsushi has started. Stage 1 is just using the Yurien that Shiro gave Kyoya to defeat Dadatsushi. This is a pretty good boss fight because Dadatsushi is invisible and you need to use sightjacking to understand what direction he's coming from. Also, when you're sightjacking, Miyako is standing next to Kyoya. After defeating Dadatsushi, Hisako instantly ages, and now you get the ending where Kyoya kills every Shibito in Hanuta to keep his promise to Miyako. But I'm pretty sure this isn't the main ending of the game. So to get the real final ending, you have to complete Objective 2 of this stage, and that's to decapitate Dadatsushi using Jun's super sweet, epic, awesome katana. I'm sorry. But after you do that, you get the true ending of the game. Hisako again turns old and gray, but falls into whatever the hell this is. Harume is now cornered by a Shibito brain. This Shibito is actually her school principal, and you see him twice. Once during the school mission with Reiko, and the second time at the same school with Naoko. As the Shibito makes his way closer and closer to Harume, he's stopped by none other than a fully Shibito-brained Reiko. With her pulling the principal down the scaffolding herself along with him, Harume now passes out. Kyoya, having just defeated Dadatsushi, now wanders around the destroyed nest. Tamon is still hugging his burned victim parents when Yuriko shows up with a bat and beats these poor people with it, only to then pull Tamon away. Harume is now wandering out into a now destroyed Hanuta with fog all around her. Kinda like how Tamon was wandering out after the landslide that took his parents' lives. Harume was saved because you can hear a helicopter at the end of the cutscene, but also in Archive 100 it states that a 10-year-old girl, Harume Yamoda, was rescued after being buried in a landslide that occurred 3 days earlier. Kyoya, Tamon, and Yuriko I'm pretty sure are stuck in the same dimension that swallowed up parts of Hanuta. Remember that Miyako told Kyoya Hanuta was in another dimension after the lights in the sky appeared. Why did those three stay behind and Harume didn't? I'm really not sure. Maybe it was because of the blood of Miyako, because if you remember, Yuriko had a blood transfusion with some of Kyoya's blood, but that wouldn't explain why Tamon was stuck here too. It could be that the amount of red water they all took in, but again, I'm not sure. What I do know is Siren has a long and confusing story, and I did my best to try to explain what happened, and give some context the game hides in its archives. If the story interests you at all and you don't have time to play the game, then you should try to look for some videos online. I'm pretty sure there are much better videos out there that explain the story better than I ever could. So that's Siren. A very long and difficult horror game with some really cool ideas and some very passionate people behind it. It wasn't the scariest game I've played, it was definitely unlike any other horror game I've ever played. The difficulty alone was something I wasn't expecting. The puzzles and having to solve them by using other characters to aid each other was really neat. Siren isn't a short game. It took me 19 hours to finish it and another 5 to grab all the archives. Like I said, getting all the archives isn't necessary, but it will help you understand the story better because boy was I confused as fuck playing it. Siren is a game that is confusing to understand if you're just gonna power through it and finish it. To understand Siren, you have to do a bit more work, and if you're planning on playing the NTSC version of the game, you'll be missing out on some bits of a few cutscenes that were censored out. You'll also be missing out on the occultland.com website that gives you more details on the story. Siren was a fun horror game. Its combat wasn't all that good, but it was something I could work with. Siren is a horror stealth game first, with some really cool mechanics like sightjacking. One thing I will say Siren does really well. Not once did the game ever fade to white. I play horror games in a dark room hugging a pillow. A room so dark that someone would worry about my mental health, and not once did Siren blind me like Miyako by flashing the brightest color possible at me. And I really appreciate that, and I'm looking at you, Darkwood. Should you play Siren? I think you should. I mean, it's free $5 on PSN. If you're looking for a different type of horror game, or you're just an enjoyer of horror games, Siren should be on your radar. Be prepared for a very long game though, and there is no shame in using a guide for Siren. In fact, I used one. I think the funniest part of the game is the voice acting, but if you can make it past that, combat might be your next biggest obstacle, but even then, it's really not that bad. For the most part, every objective felt like I was making progress, except for the ones where you have to beat the stage within a certain time limit, and I just felt like those were kind of boring and lazy, but there's like 3 of those types of missions throughout the whole game. And if you beat the game, you'll unlock a time attack mode. See if you can beat my 19 hours. I know that there's a sequel to Siren, and that game looks more scarier than this one was to me, but still, you should give Siren a try and see if that's your cup of tea. It's a really unique horror game in a class of its own. Thank you for watching. Sorry this video took so long to make. I had plans on making one video about 3 different horror games. It was Siren, Darkwood, and Rule of Rose, but Siren was a lot longer than I thought it would end up being, and I didn't think it would take 19 hours to beat. Right after finishing it, I began writing the script and playing the other horror games, and about 10 pages into the script I realized I should just focus on one game first. I still have plans on revisiting the other games. I still have footage and I want to make a video about them, but probably not very soon. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I didn't miss too much of the story. I also already have half a script written out for another video, so hopefully I can get that out soon too. Thanks again. I hope you had a good Halloween, and I'm trying to release videos faster and be more consistent. I'll also leave some sources of like interviews and other interesting things I found out about Siren in the description. So if you are interested in that, you can find more there. Also, there's a manga about Siren. I didn't include that, I forgot. I just remembered. This is all ad-lib. It didn't feel right to leave without talking about the manga, so there's a few manga out there. Siren Call of the Red Sea, and that has backstories on the characters, and then there's Siren Rebirth, and that's retelling of the first Siren game. And thank you again for watching.